I'll cast an Unholy Heat, targeting my Ragavan to my round 2. On the good to decent chance you don't know what that means, that's just fine. This is part 2 of a 4-part series that's going to occur weekly for the foreseeable future, because I have game stores in my area, local game stores, that allow me to record games of Modern that I play at those local game stores, so I can turn them into content for you guys. Today I'm playing Izzet Murktide, a tempo deck and one of the best decks in the format. If you want to know more about this deck, definitely check out the first video in the series. That was game 1. I think I'll make a habit of kind of explaining the deck a little bit, hopefully in the future even better than I did for this first video, in game 1 of the 4-part series. And then I'll kind of try to keep the intro shorter for parts 2, 3, and 4 to not say the same thing over and over again. But if you missed it, it's a tempo deck. It plays Ragavan, Murktide Regent, and all that good stuff. That's everything you should need to go going into this video. So without further ado, round 2. Alright, round 2, we're playing against Paul Barbie, and he's piloting Living End. He is on the play, and he has mulliganed to 6, and I'm keeping a 7-card opener with Counterspell, Misty Rainforest, Dragon's Rage Channeler, Steam Vents, Ragavan, Unholy Heat, and a Scalding Tarn. Turn 1. Paul's going to start with Botanical Sanctum untapped and pass the turn to me. I'll shock in a Steam Vents, dropping to 18, and play Ragavan. Then I'll pass the turn, but before I can, Paul cycles Curator of Mysteries to draw a card. Paul's going to draw his card for turn and drop a Misty Rainforest and pass the turn back to me, and I'll play a Misty Rainforest of my own. Then I'll attack Paul for 2 with my Ragavan, dropping him to 18. I'll make a treasure, and then the Ragavan trigger is going to reveal a Misty Rainforest. After that, I'll play a Dragon's Rage Channeler and try to pass the turn, but first, Paul's going to fetch and shock in a Steam Vents, dropping to 15, and then discard a Waker of Waves using its ability. He's going to put a card in the graveyard and add 1 to his hand. Paul drops a second Botanical Sanctum and just passes the turn. I'm going to play an island and attack for 3 with both of my creatures. That's going to drop him to 12. We trigger Ragavan, reveal Force of Negation off the top of Paul's library, and I try to pass, but before I can, he's going to discard Waker of Waves to its ability, then cycle a Street Wraith, dropping down to 10 life, and use a mana to cycle Architects of Will. Moving to Paul's 4th turn, he'll play a Misty Rainforest as land for turn and immediately fetch for an island, dropping down to 9. Then I'll cycle Curator of Mysteries and try to pass the turn, but before he can, I'll consider triggering my Dragon's Rage Channeler, and I'll put an Unholy Heat in the graveyard. Then I'll bin a Consider to the Consider itself and draw the card. Then I'll fetch for a tap Steam Vents, dropping to 17. I'll play a Scalding Tarn as my land for turn, attack for 3 with my Dragon's Rage Channeler and the Ragavan, dropping Paul down to 6. He's going to flip a Grief, and then I'll cast Expressive Iteration, triggering my Dragon's Rage Channeler. I'll then Aspire Bluff Canal, then I'll put a Counterspell into my hand off of the Expressive Iteration. I'll bottom a land, and I'll exile a Spell Pierce, and then pass the turn. Paul just drops Aspire Bluff tapped and tries to pass the turn, but at the end of his turn, I'll cast Consider, triggering my Dragon's Rage Channeler, and put a Steam Vents in the bin to the DRC. Then I'll bin a Consider to the Consider, and then draw off Consider. On my turn, I'll bolt Paul, triggering my DRC, and bin a Fiery Islet to the DRC trigger. Paul drops down to 3 off of the bolt, then I attack Paul for 3 with DRC and Ragavan. Before combat damage, Paul's going to channel War to try to bounce my Ragavan, but I have a response. I'll cast an Unholy Heat, targeting my Ragavan, triggering my Dragon's Rage Channeler. I'll bin an island to the DRC trigger. Then Ragavan hits my graveyard to the Unholy Heat, making me delirious, so the Dragon's Rage Channeler hits for 3, meaning I win game 1. Moving on to match 2, which means sideboard time. We have no clue how Paul sideboarded, nor do we care, but what I've done is I've added 2 Unlicensed Hearse to my deck, 2 Flusterstorm, 1 Blood Moon, and 1 Magus of the Moon, and I've trimmed 1 Consider, 1 Expressive Iteration, 1 Mishra's Bauble, and 3 Unholy Heat. The Hearses should be self-explanatory. The Flusterstorms are good because they can counter a Living End through a Force of Negation, and the Blood Moon effects are because the mana base that Paul is running is very, very greedy. We trimmed on Consider, Expressive, and Bauble because we just needed to find a place to trim, and we got rid of some Unholy Heats because trying to kill his creatures after they come into play is kind of a lost cause. Paul's on the play and he's keeping a 7-card hand, as are we. Our opener includes an island, an island, an island, a Misty Rainforest, a Ledger Shredder, a Flusterstorm, and a Mishra's Bauble. Paul's going to start us off by shocking in a Steam Vents, dropping to 18, and passes the turn to me. I'll drop a Misty Rainforest, then I'll try to pass back to Paul, but first he's going to cycle a Striped Riverwinder, drawing a card. Paul's going to shock in a Steam Vents once again, dropping to 16, and try to pass, but first I'll fetch for a tap Steam Vents, dropping to 19. I'll play an island, try to pass the turn right back, but Paul's going to cycle 2 copies of Architects of Will. Moving back to Paul's turn, he's going to drop a Misty Rainforest, and then pitch a Street Wraith to evoke cast his Grief, taking my Flusterstorm, and then he's going to pass the turn to me. I'll play an island, and then try to cast an Unlicensed Hearse, but in response, Paul's going to fetch and shock a Breeding Pool into play, dropping to 13, and then cast Violent Outburst. This will cascade into a Living End. He'll cast Living End. I try to Spell Pierce the Living End, but then Paul is going to pitch a Force of Negation to Force of Negation my Spell Pierce, and this is how we lose. In case anyone was wondering how Living End wins the game, this is it. All his creatures come back into play, he untaps and swings. There's no way I can deal with all these creatures. We're going to game Game 3. Moving into Game 3, our sideboard plan does not change. Paul's going to mulligan down to 6, as are we, but the hand that I mulligan initially is going to be 3 copies of Counterspell, an Expressive Iteration, Murktide Regent, and 2 Scalding Tarn. This hand looks okay at first glance, but it does not line up well against his disruptive spells. Instead, I'll keep an Island, a Dragon's Rage Channeler, a Spirebluff Canal, a Ragavan, an Otawara, and a Lightning Bolt, shipping a second copy of Ragavan to the bottom of my deck. This time I'm on the play, so I'm going to drop a Spirebluff Canal, play a Ragavan, and pass the turn. Paul's going to drop a Botanical Sanctum and pass as well. I'll play an Island, attack Paul with Ragavan, dropping him to 18, make a treasure. He'll flip Striped Riverwinder, then I'll play Dragon's Rage Channeler and try to pass the turn. But first, Paul's going to cycle a Street Wraith, dropping to 16, and I'll cycle a second Street Wraith, dropping to 14. He'll cycle a Striped Riverwinder, and then he's going to untap and play a Steam Vents and just pass the turn. I'll attack Paul for 3 with my Dragon's Rage Channeler and Ragavan, dropping him to 11. I'll make a treasure, and I'll flip a Steam Vents from the top of his library to the Ragavan. I'll cast Expressive Iteration, triggering my DRC, and I'll bin a Steam Vents to the DRC trigger. I'll exile Mishra's Bauble, I'll take a Bolt into my hand, and then I'll put a land on the bottom of my library. I'm going to play the Bauble, triggering my DRC, and I'll put a Scalding Tarn into the graveyard. Then I'll use the Bauble to target Paul, I see the top card, and then I'll play Otawara as my land for turn and pass. At the beginning of Paul's upkeep, I'll draw a card to my Bauble trigger, then he'll play a Spirebluff Canal and pass the turn. I'll play Misty Rainforest, attack Paul for 3 with both of my creatures, and he will declare no blocks. Before damage, I cast Lightning Bolt, targeting Paul, triggering my Dragon's Rage Channeler. I'll put a Murktide from my library into the graveyard off of the DRC, making us delirious. The Bolt resolves, dropping Paul to 8, and then we go to combat damage, dropping him to 3, triggering the Ragavan. He's going to flip a Mystical Dispute. I'm going to try to pass the turn, but Paul's going to cast Violent Outburst at the end of my turn. I'm going to Bolt, targeting Paul with that on the stack, and trigger my DRC. We kind of missed the trigger, but Paul is going to pitch Force of Negation to try to Force of Negation the Bolt. But then I cast his Mystical Dispute that we exile with the Ragavan, targeting his Force of Negation, meaning that the Bolt resolves, dropping Paul to 0, and we win this game. For the astute of you that noticed, yes, Paul should have definitely taken his actions before I dealt combat damage, because the Ragavan and its trigger could reveal something detrimental to his game plan, like a Mystical Dispute, which is exactly what happened. Now, I did have the Bolt, and I could have leveraged that turn a little bit differently had he responded with different timing, but because of the way he responded, he allowed me to kind of just kill him by revealing the Mystical Dispute and locking him out of something like a Force of Negation, which is what wound up happening. That's it for Game 2 of this series. If this is your first time getting pipped, I think I said this at the beginning of the video, I can't remember, but if you were pipped and you're watching this and you're wondering what the context is and why I keep referencing this as round 2, that's going to be because you missed round 1, maybe. Definitely check out this video that's somewhere on the screen. It is the first round of a 4-round tournament. The next round comes out tomorrow, and the 4th round comes out the day after that. And then guess what? Next week we do it all again, because I play Magic weekly, and I'm going to make a ton of content out of it to bridge the gaps between our giant Commander games that we upload about once a week. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow.